My name is Bob Johnson, a lifelong resident of Monterey County, specifically Salinas Valley. My grandfather immigrated to the valley in 1873, and I'm the third generation who's been involved in agriculture in the valley. Born in 1930. I kind of grew up when the lettuce industry was king and it was maturing, and the valley was at that time not growing the great variety of crops they do grow now. Certainly we didn't have wine grapes there at that time, except there was some. I had a grandfather who was French, and I understand that he was making wine during the Prohibition, but that was just for friends and family. But anyway, I grew up on a farm that originally had been established as a cattle and grain operation without any irrigation. So grain farming, you plant the grain in the late fall and hope you get enough rain to get a decent crop. And you're totally dependent on the weather, that it's unpredictable what kind of a crop you'll get. And the same thing for the cattle. If you're grazing in the hills, you're dependent on the rain for the growth of the range grasses. And they also had a dairy which helped, a small dairy which helped to some extent, but by the time I was born, the year before I was born, they drilled the first irrigation well on the farm that I eventually ended up farming. And I kind of grew up throughout the development of that farm from a grain and cattle operation into doing all the things necessary to make it a viable irrigated operation. You have to level the land, you have to develop the water, put in pipelines to get the water to the fields, and then we would grow. In those days we grew things like dry beans, which is an irrigated crop. I call them dry beans because they're harvested dry. They're not green beans such as string beans. We grew, one of the early crops that came in was sugar with Speckled Sugar Company. And of course lettuce was always a crop. There was a pretty limited number of crops that we grew. I'd say 4 or 5 at most, but that, as the years went on, it gradually expanded into more and more different types of crops. Growing up, I worked on the farm many, many years, and I know some of my contemporaries that I went through school with says, the last thing I'm going to do is come back and work on the farm. You know, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to do something else. And there's quite a number of us that went to college and we said, that's not such a bad thing. And we came back to the farm. At the time that I was in college, they developed this thing called vacuum cooling of lettuce. Up until that point in time, almost all the lettuce was shipped on freight cars, refrigerated freight cars, but they were packed in huge wooden crates, which are about half lettuce and half ice. And so you're paying for the shipping of all those wooden crates and that ice. And then if it took too long to arrive at the destination, the ice would melt and the quality of the lettuce was not all that great. Well, they developed this method of vacuum cooling lettuce. You could then pack the lettuce in the field in a dry cardboard carton. You didn't have to have it in the shed next to an ice plant. So you could pack it in the field, staple the carton, put the carton on a truck, and then you could put a whole truckload of lettuce into one of these vacuum cooling buildings. You take as much air as you can suck out of the building, and then you chill it down to somewhere in the mid-30s. Usually the optimum was like 36 to 38 degrees. And then immediately load it onto a refrigerated truck. And the other thing that happened, Eisenhower became president and created the interstate highway system, which made it possible to ship lettuce by truck all the way from here to the East Coast within 48 hours. And I don't think there's a head of lettuce being shipped on a train. It hasn't been for many, many years. Other cooling methods were developed and shipping methods so that all different types of products could be shipped greater distances and have greater shelf life. And I think the The next greatest innovation I saw in packaging after the vacuum cooling was the packaged salads that you get now in the store. That came in probably about 25 years ago, and it just changed the whole industry. At the time that came in, I was growing a lot of broccoli. A great deal of the broccoli went into the freezer market, and about then microwaves became a popular thing, and people learned how to cook their broccoli in a microwave, so that the whole market shifted from about half frozen, half fresh market to almost all fresh market. And then this packaging of prepared salads that you can get in the market now, just pick up a whole package and you can have several nights of salad out of that, and you can add things to it or modify it any way you want. And that's just been a huge boon to the industry. And another thing that I thought was a huge advance in the industry, because I talked about you have to level the land to irrigate it, because water doesn't run uphill, obviously. And not only could we level the land, they came out with this method called laser leveling. You used a laser beam to guide the device that was moving the dirt, and you could create a field as flat as a pool table with any gradient you wanted in any direction you wanted, so that the grade of the land anywhere you stood in the field was exactly the same, where before it was kind of, it wasn't that precise, and any place where water was running, it didn't soak in as much, and where water ran a little slower or stood, it soaked in more, so you wouldn't get the efficiency of the water usage, where with the laser planing, the efficiency of the water usage just went up tremendously. And then the other thing that is so universally used now is drip irrigation, which probably was the last thing to really cap off the efficiency of water use. And of course, water, if you're in irrigated farming, is a very important commodity and a very precious commodity. And I just might comment that over the years that I was growing up, more and more wells were drilled in the valley. I don't know if you're aware, the Salinas River flows mostly underground. In the winter with heavy rains it would flood, and in summer it wouldn't be running in the bed of the river, it would be underground. And so most of the valley you could drill a well and develop water. Well, as more and more wells got developed, we got what you call seawater intrusion in the Castroville area closest to the Monterey Bay. My fathers and some of their fathers got together and said, we've got to do something about this. And they built the two major dams on the two major tributaries of the river so that they can use the dams for flood prevention, and then also they can keep the river running year-round. So the water, instead of flowing out to the sea 200,000 acre-feet a year just going out into the sea, it's percolating into the ground table and replenishing the underwater aquifer. And they have completely stopped the seawater intrusion in the Castroville area. And I talked to somebody the other day, I have no way of confirming it, but this person said they've actually found evidence that they've reversed the seawater intrusion process to some extent. I'm not sure whether to believe it or not, but stopping it was a big enough deal to me. Right now, the Salinas Valley does not take any federal or state water. They form their own irrigation district. They own the dams. They have control of their own water. They're not dependent on a state allocating X many acre-feet of water or anything like that. We do have meters on our wells. We know how much water we're removing from the aquifer, and we have a pretty good idea how much is going back in, and we've pretty well established equilibrium at least, and hopefully eventually the seawater intrusion can be reversed, truly reversed, to where it's easily monitored. I think the Salinas Valley is unique in the world. There are probably other places similar to it, but there's somewhere over 250,000 acre-feet of irrigated land in Salinas Valley, And it's one of the few valleys that the mouth of the valley opens to the north. And we have the Monterey Bay sitting directly north, or be northwest of the Salinas Valley. And we have, you people over here should know about the Monterey Canyon, the deep canyon. It's much deeper than the Grand Canyon in Arizona. The upwelling of the cold water creates the cold air that flows into the Salinas Valley and allows us to grow cool weather crops, particularly in the northern end of the valley, almost year round. The Salinas Valley is as much about climate as it is about soil. There's some good soil in Salinas Valley, there's some lousy soil in Salinas Valley, but the climate really makes the product that we produce. It's very, very unique. There's very few places that have that combination of circumstances. Land use has become more and more of an issue because there are fewer and fewer people producing food for more and more people. You have the problem of farming next to an urban area. There's complaints about dust, there's complaints about smells, odors, pesticides. And then there's the majority of the population, which controls our legislatures, our government, don't seem to think farmers know how to take care of their land, and so they like to form general plans and pass laws, zoning laws and that sort of thing that make it more difficult for agriculture. You know, I'm not against preserving farmland, but I think a property owner should have the right, say, to build a facility that's related to his agricultural operation on his own property. And there have been instances where this has been made very, very difficult for growers to do. And I just want to point out that it was way back in the 60s, and I was very active in the County Farm Bureau then. The city of Salinas was growing very much from the northeast to the west and south, where some of the best soil you'll find anywhere in the world was. And the Farm Bureau, the Salinas Valley Grower Shipper Association, and the City Council of Salinas got to work together, and they finally drew a line, which is they call Blanco Circle. There's a street called Blanco Circle that pretty well encircles the west and south side of Salinas, and said there will be no more construction or development of farmland beyond this street. And that's a good 40 or more years ago that happened. There was one 40-acre parcel that had already been grandfathered in, and they allowed that to be developed, but beyond that there's no developed land beyond that Blanco Circle that they drew then. So, you know, and this was through the cooperation of agricultural people and the city fathers that this happened. So it's not that we don't care about saving that land. In fact, there at one time when I was active on the Farm Bureau, there was a proposal by Caltrans to build a freeway right across that area from Salinas up somewhere through Fort Ord, to have a freeway straight from there to Monterey. And the people in agriculture killed that one because they didn't want a freeway right through, because the next thing you're going to have service stations, you're going to have restaurants, and you see what's happening on Highway 80 on the way to Sacramento. I mean, that's almost a corridor now, and you almost can't tell there's farmland alongside the road. And you can drive up and down Salinas Valley and you can see farmland from the freeway. I really have to say I feel good about where things are going, and I think it's in good hands, and it's going to be in good hands. But it's a constant battle to keep an industry like this viable and not have somebody make rules. Like when the E. coli incident happened, there were people trying to make rules that had never set foot on a farm, had no idea what the impact of their rules would be. And you know, somehow we need to be regulated, but we need to have some input to that regulation.